I have two kind of bigger picture questions, and these aren't necessarily in your book, but I think you'd have a particular take on these. The paradigm I use for kind of giving a framework around the oil industry in the long run, and you touched on this somewhat earlier. You mentioned the Canadian railways. There's two Canadian railways that dominate the market up there. That is actually my framework and paradigm, my economic paradigm, if you will, for thinking about where we're going in the oil business. So I tell people that I think there's going to be 3 Canadian oil companies that dominate the oil and gas business in, say, 15 or 20 years, okay? Just like we're watching Union Pacific possibly go after CSX in America right now, which would leave us with 2 major railways here in America. And so if I think that those paradigms, capital-intensive industry, has cyclicality, needs major investment, those kind of fall in line with the oil business. So I think that's where we're going. Would you say that the railroad business is a good model to think about? Because, again, you need rationality on pricing. Or is that a bad economic paradigm to frame the oil business with in Canada, let's just say?
Well, that's a good question. Railways are... Let's put it this way: railways have an established role of transportation.
Mm-hmm.
Once you've got the royal bed in place and the rolling stock and all the rest, it just becomes a kind of, well, who's going to be better and more efficient at running it?
Sure.
In the oil business, it's sort of it's kind of depends. It depends on whether you're lucky enough to be at the right place at the right time, and be able to exploit opportunities. And this has been true in the oil business all along. You will have, entrepreneurs. I mean, J. Paul Getty would be an example back in the 60s.
Sure.
That would go out and, this was in the time when the big refiners cartel, the Seven Sisters ran everything.
Yeah.
But he was able to come in and he, broke into that big car. He didn't actually break into the cartel. He just defied them.
Sure.
And it's that kind of thing that, it's serendipity, if you will, the ability to take advantage of an opportunity that I think makes it a much more potentially dynamic kind of situation. Railways, you know what they're going to do. If they're better at it than the other side, or eventually, or it makes more sense for them to, to consolidate in order to cut costs. Yeah, that makes sense. And in a way, the big oil companies have tried to do that. That's why they formed the refiners cartel.
Sure. I agree.
There's always going to be somebody. And in a company, well, another example, mining is another one. You have, I was actually looking at the gold industry, gold mining. Companies like Barrick Gold, for example, are huge. They have investments all over the world, although sometimes they make a mistake. Like, I think they had a big investment in some African country, and they just had a revolution, and the new president just said, I'm going to close down all the
the mines,
all the gold mines that belong to foreigners. So, but there's another one. It's just, I think it's called New Gold or something like that. And these guys, I don't know, they've got a very few mines spared compared to a company like Barrick or El Dorado or whatever. But their stock has taken off because it's almost like going back to the good old days of the gold rush. They're the guys who got there first, and panned the gold.
Sure. The other kind of bigger picture question I wanted to ask you was, and I'll give you my 2 cents on this, and I'll probably look more foolish than you will, but can you ever see a point in the future where Imperial is not controlled or majority owned by Exxon Mobil?
Well, what's your opinion?
Well, so here's I'll give you my opinion. I think I can see where it's not. And if I use your book as my key to understand how that could come to pass, it will only transpire through Canadian politics. That's it. That's the only way it happens. And I could see where a very charismatic politician comes about and says, in the scale business of oil, like if we get down to fewer players, like we will continually, I think we'll do, they will say, why does it make sense to have an American business so onerously controlling such a Canadian history and Canadian industry? And I could see that being, but where it would come about is through the lobbying of a Canadian owner who says, hey, I might want to be the controlling shareholder there.
I would say maybe. I mean, in a sense, that's what Trudeau was trying to do in the 70s, was create Petro-Canada as a company that would displace not just Imperial Oil, but all the big oil companies in Canada.
Sure.
And I mean, well, look at Russia. There's an example for you. Putin comes along and he rounds up all the oligarchs who took over the oil industry there, and some of them get thrown in jail, and some of them have been sent into exile, and now it all belongs to Putin.
Yeah.
But
by the way, there's some oil executives that if it's sent off into exile, the companies would do a lot better, to be honest. So maybe there's some truth to that rumor. Let's see. I want to hit a couple topics that we didn't talk about, but I just got to throw out there as breadcrumbs for our listeners, Graham. So we touched quickly at Prudhoe Bay. Other things we didn't talk about: the Greater Canadian Oil Sands, which ends up becoming part of Suncor. Suncor being part of the old Sun Oil. We didn't talk about Interprovincial Pipeline, now what we know as Enbridge, which was in your book. We also don't talk about Esso, which was you talked about the Esso brand coming across. You talked about a tiger in your tank, which I remember as a kid here in the United States of America. You talked about sponsoring Hockey Night in Canada.
Oh, yes.
I mean, there was just so many good pieces to this book. So I kind of want to open it up to you since we're late. Is there something in this history that you found so peculiar or fun that you'd really want to share with our listeners, or something that's outside the book that you never did talk about?
Well, I don't, I can't think of something right off the bat. Jesus, I sound like that woman who ran for president last year. I can't think of a thing.
Yeah. Well, because there's just so many good things. I mean, like when you're explaining Hockey Night in Canada, I just thought, this is incredible that Imperial was the brand of Hockey Night. And given growing up in the United States, I would never know that. But the tiger in your tank, for example, like I remember as a kid, they would give you to put around the opening of the gas can, you could put a tiger tail, and cars would have tiger tails hanging out of their gas cap.
Right. Yeah. That was interesting because those were the American company. It was the Standard people that invented the tiger, of course. No, actually, I didn't come to think of it. They got it from some British company. There was some British oil company that came up with the tiger. But the tiger, this is the thing that's interesting. I forgot which one it was. It wasn't BP, but it was one of them. The tiger that they featured in their ads was a big, scary tiger. And it wasn't a big hit. Yeah. But when it got to the US, they said, oh, we're going to make a friendly tiger. He's a cartoon character. And that was very successful. So it all matters. It all depends on how you design your brand. My guess is, as we're in the Trump era, people would much rather have a fierce, dangerous tiger than a cartoon tiger.
Yep.